Welcome to the Current Buddhist. I am Reverend Shen-Wen, and today I'll be going over my current understanding of the Eightfold Noble Path. Um, I'm going to give you a kind of an overview, and then I'm going to try and stick with one step at a path at a time, so that way it's easier to digest. Typically, the Eightfold Noble Path is divided into three classifications. All right, you've got moral discipline, mental concentration, and wisdom. So, under wisdom usually falls right view and right intention. Under moral discipline is usually right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And mental concentration is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, or right dhyana is another. Dhyana typically being the precursor, the Pali precursor to the word Zen. Um, so it'll be best to take it one step at a time, and there isn't really a start or an end to the path, or even really a progression per se, but the way that I look at it is each step of the path informs and supports the others. And it provides a depth and a dimension to one another, much like Indra's net does, where each jewel in the net reflects all of the other jewels in the net. Um, but since we need to start somewhere, right view is probably as good as a place as any. So, right view is actually a good starting point because an argument could be made that it provides a ground for us to leap off from. Right view is the way we look at our existence in a nutshell, or at least how we practice to be able to look at it. It involves knowing that all things in this physical world are causal. One thing comes from another, and nothing comes from nothing. It involves knowing that these causes condition the world to behave in a certain way. It involves knowing that these causes and conditions are interdependent and interconnected. Think somewhat along the lines of taking a handful of pebbles and throwing them into a pond and watching as the ripples move outward from one another and bump into each other and create new patterns. Uh, Now, if you take that same thought process and imagine 8 billion people throwing handfuls of pebbles into the same pond, you'll also have a fairly decent idea, or at least the beginnings of an idea, of how karma operates. So, right view can be said to truly begin with the three pure precepts of do no harm, do only good, do good for others. And when we take a view of doing good and doing no harm, we have to understand how that works in a causal universe. We need to understand what good and harm actually are, whether or not it's even possible to do only good and do no harm, or what we can do if those aren't possibilities. So, right view begins to weave these concepts together into a tapestry that we can perhaps gain some insight from. We all know that this human condition is impermanent. We know that to live human is to know unsatisfactoriness and suffering. We know that we can't exist independent of one another or any other aspect of this universe. We know that our concept of ourselves is empty and changes. We aren't the same us that we were yesterday or last year or when we were 5 years old. We know that we have experienced suffering and that we don't, or at least shouldn't, want this for other beings. We know that our actions can ripple outward and affect others. And if we look at the world in this way and our relationship to it, especially from a place informed by the three pure precepts, we can see that we have a massive impact on the state of not just our happiness and ability to flourish, but that of everyone else in the world as well. Uh, the problem is that we often behave, if not in practice, at least in concept, like we're immortal. We chase money or power or pleasure like it's never going to end, or like they won't cause our own problems if we have them, or like we're going to take it all with us. But that's not how any of this works. We forget that there's only so much of most things to go around. So when we hoard money, others become poor. When we hoard power, others lose their agency. And if we only seek pleasure, then we rob others of their ability to pursue their own. And these things become narcotic, and we hurt when they disappear. So right view recognizes that our concept of I is empty. So who is it that desires these things? Who is it that desires money? Who desires power? For what purpose? recognizes that we are all interdependent and interconnected. So when you suffer, so do I. When we all do well, we all do well. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. It recognizes that I can take action to help another to ease their unsatisfactoriness, that my current condition is impermanent and time continues to tick by. The end of every Zen service says, time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. You must strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life. It's also worth remembering that right view covers how we view ourselves. The ancient Druids used a system of threefold sayings called triads to dispense their wisdom. And one of them was three things a man is: what he thinks he is, what he actually is, and what others think he is. And there's a very deep lesson here. But you can see in your daily interactions with people, people who view themselves in ways that are perhaps out of sync with the current reality. There are examples, for instance, of a new appreciation for Viking archetypes, especially in men's fashion and men's mannerisms of late. Um, but these ideas are born from a way of life that came out of necessity and probably have been romanticized beyond their actuality. Beyond that, our view of what it means to be a man should be contemporary with the movements of our world. There's a number of reasons that Vikings no longer exist in the classical sense, but I think chief among them is the fact that that way of life is no longer relevant on any practical scale. So, what is the value, personally or socially, of trying to resurrect an archetype that's seen its time pass? And that can be applied to virtually any of these concepts when we sit there and say, it used to be this, or things used to be better, or things used to be easier. Um, and that may not necessarily be true. A lot of these things are just familiar. And when they pass, as all things do, eventually that can be a source of unsatisfactoriness for us. So it's best to look at the way that the world is and say, my concept of who I should be, of how I should be reflected in the way that the world currently is. And as the world progresses, it opens up into a greater understanding of people, of itself, of our universe and our existence. And that understanding should be reflected in our behavior and our mannerisms. So, right view is how we learn to look at our existence within this world, in this place, at this time, but without all of the delusions that we've come to have faith in, and instead begin to put our importance on being present and existing within the world as it is, without forgetting that all things are impermanent, and with seeing that we should treat each other with compassion, patience, and thoughtfulness. Amitwal.